There's a lot of lists. My background is more therapy, Buddhism, and there's a lot of lists. And I always thought, well, I'm not going to give too many talks on those lists because they just sound really almost too much. Let's just talk from the heart, from my experience. But today I have a few things that are list oriented. But at the end of the talk, there is actually a practice that is intended to be really simple, like the three-step practice to look at some of our own suffering or habits, behaviors that get in the way. And and the one way is to just recognize, like, oh, here's a habit. I'm on autopilot a lot, and here's one that I know gets in my way. That could be smoking, or when nervous, maybe some people have stress habits like eating a whole box of cookies, or sometimes, I get confused about things, or like like today I mentioned if you were here, like I really had plans to be here a half hour early. I was here 20 minutes early, but sometimes just having habits to not pay attention to time or planning, that now we're really stressed out on driving. So the whole drive is like a stress moment as opposed to, oh, I can just relax. I'm going to be there early, like going to the airport, you know, p- packing a couple days before instead of the night before. Anybody do that sort of thing? Well, those are things that related to the talk. There's conditions, and the good news, I believe, for myself and everybody, is the potential that we can set conditions so that we could change, some of these behaviors, even when there are things that happen to us. Conditions that happen, that the outcomes aren't always predetermined, and that is really, I think, one of the teaching from attributed to Buddha, the historic Buddha, that things are not predetermined. Um, and a teacher wiser than me, Gil Fronsdal shared a teaching. I take a lot of different programs with Gil, and one was this X-ray vision, um, on this idea of conditionality, which is such a big part of Buddhist teaching, that we can see what are the conditions that cause our suffering or cause us something to get in our way, and is it something that we're making worse, and is it possible at a minimum, can we not make it worse? Like, could that just be the low bar? But how great that would be if we don't make certain things worse. And I'm sharing that because it had really profound impact on me. It's like, oh yeah, if I just don't even make it worse, that would be better. That would be a lot better. And I don't smoke cigarettes now, but I did, when I was younger. So instead of having a whole pack, maybe a half a pack, or um, and that we could set the conditions to change certain things. But of course, there are things that come our way that we can't set the conditions for. That the conditions happen, but what can we do to make it tangled or caught up, or to have it drag us down further? And a lot of that might just be rumination and trying to fix something with our thinking, our ruminating mind. Um, that doesn't really fix anything. We could fix it. I mean, sometimes, well, certainly our thinking can really help, but when the rumination becomes a habit, that doesn't help us. Anybody have that ever? Like, I don't want to presume, although I see it. Great. So, because I don't want to confuse thinking and how incredible it is that we could plan and change conditions, fix things, like we saw a leak in the plumbing and now we can, you know, arrange to have the plumbing fixed, or we're really good at creating and doing things and solving problems. So not trying to confuse the positive thinking and the positive habits with the ones that get in the way, so that apparently during the ancient times, there were a lot of beliefs where things were predetermined. And people might still have those beliefs today. Like there are gods and from the ancient times that I don't really know too much about. But just the general idea that there were so many different factions and beliefs, and people really did believe they were predetermined, like people's fate was predetermined. So it's kind of radical teaching to teach about conditionality, which one of those lists that's quite well known is called the Four Noble Truths. And some teachers, one Stephen Batchelor from the UK and some other, they like to refer to it as like the four tasks, like, so it doesn't sound so magical or something. But can we see that there is some kind of suffering or dissatisfaction that might be caused by something that we're doing, that we're getting in our own way? um, and that it's not all predetermined, that we can change conditions, that we can see that there's a cause. So the first noble truth is, or the first task is that there is suffering. Um, Another teacher, Brasinger, he refers to it in very pragmatic terms, like when something is a bummer, like, oh, that's a bummer, or something is really unsatisfying, or another word is suffering. And then the etymology of the word suffering I find fascinating because I like the word history. So the SU spelled SUFFER, the FER is the same root as in the word ferry, a ferry that, you know, ships people like a ferry boat. So it comes from Latin. And the SU, so you have to kind of bear with me because I'm not really not a Latin expert, but it's a root word that means, it can actually mean to go under. And sometimes it can mean to go over. So that's kind of funny. But so this idea of suffering is to carry something like under. So we're actually carrying something. We're holding on to something. I thought, well, that's such an interesting thing to show uh, that the literal meaning of suffering means is to like kind of bear. And also the FER, it has something called Proto-Indo-European roots, which is where like Sanskrit and European languages all kind of blended in some place. There are some words that have the same root, and the root for the FER is bear, BEHR. So that's the ultimate root of the word English word suffering, and that bear means to bear something, to hold on to it, and it also is used for women who are pregnant to bear a child. This seems familiar, doesn't it? Um, and maybe some folks who've carried pregnancy, maybe there is some truth to carrying this, and that this is a little bit of suffering, really having a lot to bear. So the word suffering can actually be to bear. And the second task, the second noble truth is um, to know that there are conditions that cause suffering. And then the third is that there can be an end of this suffering. And then the fourth is like a path or instructions, which are the Eightfold Path. So now I'm getting into all these lists, but just to go back to this 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 list of four, that things aren't fully predetermined, and that we do have, in many cases, a choice to change the conditions um, to even if it comes down to like, yeah, I have left really late and now I'm really stressed out, but can I change the conditions to know how my mind works, that I can forgive myself and not ruminate because I really have to focus on driving, so that we could learn through practice to even see how our mind works, to see that rumination is like a habit that can cause suffering. Uh, and it is a term from John Kabat-Zinn, who founded mindfulness-based stress reduction program like 40 years ago, if you ever heard of that. He refers to the tyranny of the thinking mind. So even just to know, like there's thinking, as I gave that instruction earlier, to know there's thinking, that we could change relationship with rumination, even if it continues, or change relationship with unpleasant feelings just by naming them, like naming it to taming it. May not go away, but it could be quite different to be lost and really in this space where we're ruminating and upset, as opposed to saying, there's thinking. Okay, there's thinking. And now I'm no longer in it, or so over identified or attached to it. I'm now observing it. So it's like a stepping back, but it's not necessarily running away from it. It's actually in some way getting closer to it because now I see it. I'm not just on autopilot. And so this is where the second task is related to today's talk, that it has to do with seeing the conditions. And it's called dependent origination, that the Buddha gave um, a teaching that's, if anyone is interested, it's one is known as the Upanisa Sutta, where he talked about the conditioning, and it's quite scientific. Um, Another one of my teachers, who is actually a neuroscientist and a addiction psychiatrist, uh, went on to say, let's see, that this may be the first description of a psychological mechanistic pathway that accurately describes how we learn, in some cases, how we suffer. So it's a like it's like 12 steps of how conditions start that can lead to suffering. And one of them, um, it starts actually by me going back for a moment. I'll get back to that's our topic that I'll get back to is the dependent arising. And and so that we can see how suffering can kind of come from conditions, and that by seeing that we can see the conditions that we should possibly have the opportunity to maybe reverse that, so that we can cease they can cease, that we can be free from some of these habits and afflictions that we bring to ourselves. But I want to get back to that in a moment and just share again, like today is Groundhog's Day, just to be lighten this up a little bit, get away from all those lists. And so yeah, Punxsutawney Phil is the name of the groundhog, and he saw his shadow, or he or she saw his shadow, and and that this is midway between winter and spring, and that apparently there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter because this kind of mythological folklore. But apparently people celebrate and they have thousands of people come together. It's kind of fun. It's like a big community thing. They start at 7 in the morning, which is 4 in the morning here. And I did get up and watch it. It was streamed. I watched it live. I couldn't believe they started at 4 in the morning and they seemed so cold and they sang and they were so happy. And I wanted to bring the news to you to be the first one to tell you. Actually got up and watched it. And, I'm from Pennsylvania too, by the way. It's really cold. It can be cold there, really cold, below 0. But, the movie, that's what's thought, okay, February 2nd is Groundhog's Day. There's this movie, and, forgive me, I'm gonna look. I don't really like to read when I'm talking, but I'm gonna look because this is gonna help me move through this. The movie, Groundhog Day, I mentioned this earlier. It says, "Many religious scholars consider Groundhog Day an underground Buddhist classic, and that the movie's themes resonate with Buddhist ideas about nature, reality, suffering, and the path to liberation, even though the filmmakers didn't intentionally set out to create a Buddhist parable." Um, so the movie is from 1993. Bill Murray, he was famous on Saturday Night Live. He plays this guy named Phil. He's a weatherman, and he's like assigned to go to Punxsutawney to see this whole event that I watched myself at 7 in the morning to see if the groundhog sees his shadow. And he was really cynical. He's kind of an ass, and to put it bluntly, and um, and he's not very nice. But what happens is a blizzard, a magical blizzard, I suppose. And the next day he wakes up and it's Groundhog's Day again. And then every day he's stuck in the cycle where he's still, in Groundhog's Day. Um, and he's kind of a spiteful guy, but he kind of realizes like he wanted to get out of the cycle. And this is sort of this metaphor for what they call in Buddhism samsara, which is the kind of the Sanskrit or Pali language word for suffering, the cycles of suffering, the ones that are caused by this dependent origination, this conditions that we'll talk about. And but so he got stuck in there. But what's so interesting was that he started to suffer so much that he started to become a little bit less selfish and a little bit more altruistic and a lot friendlier. And he had like this, what we say in filmmaking, a character arc, where he became a friendlier person, a more altruistic person. There was his producer that he went with to film this event. I guess they didn't get along very well, and by the end, they became lovers. So he had this whole transition, and then by having this transition, like following this path of kindness, that he became uh, free of this cycle, and there was no longer stuck in Groundhog's Day. So I kind of circled back to that. He had this personal transformation. Some of the other themes in that movie, besides the cycle of samsara, are really looking at how he was stuck in what's called the 5 hindrances, which is can cause us all suffering when we really get caught in desire, or we get caught in restlessness and worry. If we get checked out, that we kind of just get zoning out, kind of checkout zone, which is called sloth and torpor, and also doubt about what to do, like uncertainty, which is quite a bit related to anxiety. Um, so he had this personal transformation, and that kind of just leads me back to the more Buddhist dependent arising, and how this is really description of this samsara or cycles that can repeat over and over. Anybody ever feel like you have this cycles where things like you have habits you can't get, or the next day starts and you can't get quite through these habits that you thought, or you start a habit and they kind of disappear or fade. I have some of those. So uh, this is actually something I already shared quite a bit about, but there are these conditions. So the way um, this is taught in a very classical ancient teaching, there's two ways. There's one that the cycle can be from our birth to death, our whole life. That this is a cycle. This is for people who may be more inclined to follow and believe in reincarnation, and so the cycle can happen in multiple lives. That the life is actually this cycle, and it's equally taught that these cycles can just be what happens to us from day to day, and that's what I'm going to talk more about. How this can relate, how this incredible teaching can relate to everyday life. Um, so it's a way of understanding what happens in our own world. It can be what happens inside or outside, uh, moment to moment, and that many of these things could just happen like so fast, like things that we do, decisions that we make. Um, and so I already mentioned that the cycle is called samsara, and it's also sometimes referred to as endless wandering. And so kind of some of the benefits of Buddhist practice is that we may find that some of that endless wandering and samsara and suffering can subside, that we can make careful choices. Um, so it begins, there's 12, but I don't want to talk about all 12. I want to make this more accessible. But I think the first few that I'm talking about, I hope that they're valuable. The first one they call ignorance, but ignorance in Buddhism is not the ignorance that we might think about in our English language. It doesn't mean that you're dumb. It means that you don't know. Like, and we do have that. We kind of have that. We don't use it so often. Like when someone's ignorant, it's kind of an insult. But it also here, it's not an insult at all. It just means that we're unaware. That it's an unknown. That we start with not knowing, and an unknowing. Uh, that could be autopilot. Like we're on autopilot. We do something and don't realize we're doing it, kind of thing. So that's a kind of ignorance. So the cycle begins with ignorance, and it could just be a situation where there's some kind of set contact. So it could be anything that contacts us, like something that we read in the newspaper, like the headline. That's contact, but it could also just be the sound, and then that's like if you don't add on, it's just a sound. Duh. But if you add on the next is a feeling tone. We call it the next in the chain of conditions is a feeling tone that we're going to feel something. So it could be that might be a feeling. You might feel it, or also the headline. Oh, the headline really made me feel something. Um, and I'll just leave anything to your imagination. You can. There's so many types of things that, but it could be sounds of birds. It could be, oh, that's beautiful. We feel wonderful things. It could be, um, basically, it can move on to when we do feel something without us thinking, typically, according to this theory, is that we have a feeling of, is that pleasant or unpleasant? It's kind of simple. Is something pleasant or unpleasant, or maybe neutral? So there's that, contact, and then it contacts us. We feel something. We're not thinking yet necessarily. Is it pleasant or unpleasant? Is sometimes before thought. And then we have a craving. It could be that we're like wanting to move towards it because it's lovely, or we want to move away from it. So the craving could be to move away. So that's the next step. And then beyond that, there could be uh, a, a holding on. Like we might hold on to it because we really like it, or we might be holding on because we really resist it. And so, and this can all be happening really fast. Um, and then there's an action that we do something. We might do something. It might be, oh, I'm feeling this, and I'm gonna have a cigarette, or I'm doing this, I'm going to eat a box of cookies to feel better. So there's something unpleasant and I just want to feel better. So that's pretty common. And so this is sort of a chain of how things in this ancient teaching, we do these, we behave, and that we can have this actually, as I mentioned earlier, can be a description for the psychological pathways that describes how we learn. And that was a quote from one of my teachers, Judd Brewer, but also how we suffer, um, and how these conditions can come together in everyday life can be like a snowstorm. So having a bigger picture is that there are conditions that come together that are bigger than just the bill. That it could be that to actually create a snowstorm, there has to be a certain temperature. The condition has to be a certain temperature. There has to be precipitation, um, and there has to be a certain amount of wind that's going to co-create the storm. So there are these conditions in our life that can be like that too. Um, Another example is like writing a book that we need an idea, um, and then we need pen and paper, and we need to have time to write the book. But there are these conditions that come together, and that we could change them. So I was trying to also say there's autopilot, and then there's also our ability to change. Um, so it isn't absolutely necessary that all these conditions are in an order. They can be switched around, but it's just to give you a general idea. And this is a quote that comes from the Buddha that describes um, kind of really simple. The basic principle of dependent origination is quite simple. When there is this, that is. With the arising of this, that arises. When this is not, neither is that. With the cessation of this, that ceases. So it's kind of general, but it's like lighting a lighter, like a match lighter. Like, you flick it, the light goes on, you take your finger, it goes off. It's quite simple. But I find it fascinating that this is something that is quite scientific, but it's really a class of teaching that is built right into the Four Noble Truths. Like there's a condition, there's causes and conditions. And he gives a very detailed list of these 12. Uh, this relates, I'm going to just kind of switch to modern times and make sure I keep track of the time, that there's also something that's called reward-based learning, which really, uh, there's a direct comparison that there's a pretty good overlap that is considered reward-based learning. I forget the guy's name. His last name is Skinner. I should have like written it down. But he's famous for what's called, there's different names for it. It's also called operant conditioning, and it's also called negative and positive reinforcement. And this is also kind of theory, but it's up to us to see how does this work for us. That also a very simple thing that all living things, this is a big statement, tend to move from something that is unpleasant or toxic even towards the pleasant. So it's kind of really simple. Like we make behaviors, our behaviors are often just like, is it pleasant or unpleasant? And then there's these feeling tones and we make choices. And so that is called reward-based learning. This is how, in theory, how we learn. And we do, if you're learning how to dance or learning how to tie your shoe, it really happens over with repetition as well. And our brain lays down a memory. Another, like an everyday example is if you would like to watch ball games or if you like to play a ball game and you win or your team wins, that feels really good. You want to celebrate, maybe even hold on to the joy. Like our team won. It's like the Super Bowl or the basketball or, the women's world soccer championship, and we want to hold on to it and celebrate. Or if we lose, it's kind of the unpleasant, it's the negative. We kind of want it, want it to go away. So it's the same idea of in the simple, if there's something really unpleasant, simple unpleasant, we want to move away from it. And that might be where we start to do stress eating, smoke cigarettes. Anybody go onto their internet device when they want to like feel meta or something, or just kind of zone out. I see lots of, so these are just really simple impulses um, that lead us to create these habits and behaviors. So winning can feel good, losing feels bad. And there's this thing about when something feels good that it's pretty common. Many people report, I'll report myself, that we want to hold on to things that feel good, even after their freshness state, for example, So that can get us in all sorts of trouble. We might overeat, and that could cause us to gain weight, or we might overdrink or over substance, or become a chain smoker, or become a sex addict, or become a gambler, gambling addict. There's all these things that can go go awry because we want to feel good. Just simple, want to be pleasant. And so these are things that in practice, in meditation, in everyday life, we could do short practices to check in, to feel into our body. Like when we sit in the cushion, feeling and learning what does it feel like to be pleasant and unpleasant? And how do those to discern, how does that drive my behavior? And to even start to see what are some of these habits that I have that are really automatic? What are some of my automatic, just based on the simple, one example, uh, going a little bit back to the simple pleasant, unpleasant is this scientist who won a Nobel Prize, um, Eric Kandel, w- learned how to teach snails and sea slugs to. He was trying to learn how the brain lays down memories, and he used the snails who only have 20,000 neurons to do these experiments. I guess he used heat, or something that he would train them, and they would measure their neurotransmitter somehow, but it was so well received, he won a Nobel Prize for it. So that they learned that what happens is, the brain actually spritzes dopamine. It's actually we have dopamine in our brain, and it's the neurotransmitter. I didn't know this, but that's the chemical that actually is there to help solidify and lay down a neural pathway or a memory. That's what it's there for. And, it also is considered like a feel-good thing. It's what keeps people on their cell phones or, smoking cigarettes or things that make them feel good. It's this dopamine rush, and it also is the same chemical that lays down memories. So getting back to autopilot, it goes back to that ignorance, which is the not knowing, the very first step in the chain of dependent arising, or the conditionality that causes us to behave in certain ways. And so I'm gonna kind of close where I said I would. I'm really happy I started where said I was going to end. So I made sure I got to this point, which that we could look at some of our behaviors as habits. It's a really simple way to be pragmatic. That we have habits. We all have habits. Some that don't serve us well, that we could call suffering or samsara, because it's hard to get rid of. And it's considered an ancient survival system that we've laid down memories and habits as a way to survive, particularly around fear. Like if we were thousands of years ago, our ancestors were chased by lions, were fearful of weather or animals. And so learning from negative and positive reinforcement, how to behave. And this also includes food, where to find food, because apparently humans were foragers before they were farmers. So you find food, you taste food, the body processes if the food is nutritious. It lays down, spritzes dopamine, it lays down a memory where to find the food. The gut system to the brain says, oh, this was nutritious. If you survive whatever that experiment was, you can know where to find it again. And so this is called the habit loop. We call it in the modern day habit loop. So habits are laid down by repetition, um, and they are made up of a trigger like hunger. The behavior is to eat. And then there's like a reward, like, oh, that feels good. That's nutritious. Sometimes the reward isn't really positive, because sometimes the trigger is an emotional problem, an argument, or something not so uh, pleasant, very unpleasant, and it might cause rumination. So rumination can be a habit as well. So the trigger is some emotional trigger. There's rumination, and then the result is we oftentimes are just trying to fix something that we can't fix. I mentioned this earlier in the talk. So rumination can be a habit. And so noticing what are some of the habits that don't serve us, whether it's stress eating or rumination, or even the feelings of anxiousness. This might be a far stretch, but anybody ever feel anxious? And it can be a habit, just to actually be a habit to be anxious. I mean, it's a natural thing that anxiety, the definition in the Oxford English Dictionary is uh, uh, feelings of worry or nervousness um, about an imminent event that is uncertain. And so uncertainty is always around. And just to give a positive, that uncertainty can also be the great adventure. But uncertainty with fear and worry can just be a lot of suffering. And so just positing that anxiety can be considered a habit sometimes. So here's this three steps. I think I mentioned this here before, but it is a great simple teaching, and it's kind of a way to look at um, the Four Noble Truths and a way out, like a way to reduce suffering. And it has been studied in scientifically, and really it doesn't matter if it was or not because we have to experience it for ourselves and try it. As from my teacher, Jed Brewer, and it's totally based on this ancient teaching. And he certainly bows and gives credit to it. In fact, he had a paper published where his teacher, one of his Dharma teachers, is Joseph Goldstein, and they both co-published a paper relating to reward-based learning and this process of just waking up to our habits. So we say, oh, here's my habit of rumination, here's my habit of stress eating, and to acknowledge it. And often it's really easy just not to acknowledge it, just to be in that state of ignorance to do. So here, if we wake up to it, the awareness, this is mindful awareness. I'm using the word mindfulness finally, and to be aware and to be willing to not run away from it and go do the stress eating or go get the cell phone, to like be with it. And to, so the second step, so even the first step can be a huge changing relationship with it could be a huge step because now we're facing it. I think this is kind of classic. Um, Especially, from what I've heard about substance abuse programs, is to face it, to wake up to. Your person has to really acknowledge it. Um, and my teacher, as I mentioned, is actually an addiction psychiatrist, so maybe there's no coincidence here. But to really be aware, to be awake, to acknowledge, and then the second step is to be willing to just pause and do a meditation, a simple, quiet meditation to not run away from it and to be with it, to breathe with it if it's possible. We're not overwhelmed. And to even ask a question. It starts in the head, like a seed, to drop the question so it goes down into the chest and into the heart, into the belly, and to feel it more than to think about it is like, what do I get from this? Like, what do I get from eating this whole box of cookies? Or what happened last time? It's like, oh, I felt sick or I'm gaining weight. The idea, this is what's called disenchantment. But it's not something that we just think about. We can think about it, but to try to feel it, it's like, oh, to feel about that time I got nauseated, to feel about if I smoke this whole pack of cigarettes, or what does it taste like to smoke? So Judd used this program to teach people about quitting smoking, but instead of telling them to quit, he would say, smoke the cigarette and savor it. Like really like a mindful smoking where you light it, you smell this, everything. And a lot of people get so disgusted because they never really tasted it, really felt it in their lungs. They're just on autopilot smoking the cigarette. So his program has a 50% greater success rate than the American Cancer Society's cessation program by having people really savor how horrible it is. Well, the other, maybe there's 50% who don't quit smoking, but it has a huge success rate to be mindful, to really just bring our awareness and focus. So this can help disenchant, but it doesn't happen one time. It's like this idea of repeating the practice in the same way we repeat the practice to learn the habit, that we're using the same reward-based learning system that taught us the reward of finding and doing this, and using it's the same mechanism, but we're doing it in reverse to see like what is the downside, what is not helpful. And sometimes there is something that's related to ignorance, or in the Buddhism, that many times we think something that is beautiful is actually poisonous. And so it could be this beautiful Dorito, or it could be this beautiful bowl of ice cream. Things that appear beautiful might be really toxic. And that kind of is a really hard truth to come up with, especially if you're like, I am pre-diabetic. So it's really hard thing to now look at food that's been beautiful and delicious as now that's kind of poison to me now. So that's an example, but this comes from Buddhism that this is one of the definitions of ignorance is to misperceive something that's actually not beautiful to be beautiful. Um, so I wanted to make sure I shared that. So to really disenchant, and one very pragmatic and not so nice example is when people are training dogs sometimes that they make the dog like smell its own poop or something, like this idea that we're really sorry about that, but to really, like notice and to see, how are we able to disenchant, uh, and then to repeat that over and over, and then even just to feel into it for a second can lower the reward value. And there's a scientific component. It's actually called the part of the brain is called the orbital frontal cortex, right here. That's they say stores values. And the study and the research that Judd's done based on this Buddhist practice of disenchantment um, is that it actually lowers reward value. But it has to be done over and over and over and over just to really feel into it. And then the third is to start a new habit. The third step, the first one is awareness. The second one is this disenchantment. And the third one is to, to really move towards what is wholesome, move away from what is unwholesome to what is wholesome. And the recommendation would be to do a little meditation practice, whether it's self-compassion. So like one right after the other, I'm aware of it. I'm doing my disenchantment. And now I'm going to take a moment to give myself a moment of loving kindness. Like, may I be happy and healthy, to help self-compassion. It could be a breath meditation. It could be a walking meditation. It could just be taking a walk or anything ultimately that shifts. Now we might have been in the middle of this autopilot habit. We've paused to see it. We've paused to disenchant, and now we could pause to move off. And that could be a huge success. And even if you don't get to the second or third step, just noticing it, being aware of it, maybe the next time you'll move on to the step number 2. Maybe the time after that, you'll move on to step number 3. And, this ancient practice of disenchantment, um, it's actually in a lot of different teachings to become aware, to have dispassion, to have disenchantment, and then which leads to cessation, which leads to freedom.
Hi, I'm Franz with Long Beach Meditation. Your gracious generosity makes this programming possible. If you found this video to be of value, please consider making a donation here. If you'd like to watch more videos like this, click here. And if you want to stay in touch with Long Beach Meditation, click here to subscribe. Thank you, and may all beings be happy.